Hi, welcome to another podcast from Fabrizio, Tom, and we have a special guest, Anandi Knuppel, with us today. We're recording our second episode where we have this joint conversational format. And the last episode was actually really popular, so it was very encouraging. Thank you for all the feedback. It was great to just start this effort. People really liked this more casual conversational idea exchange that we're having. So we're going to continue that. I'm Tom Johnson in Seattle. We've got Fabrizio, who's calling in from Berlin, where he was just giving a presentation at Write the Docs. Is that right?
Well, that's tomorrow, but yeah.
Oh, so you're in. Okay. All right.
I was just scouting the location, but yeah, the talk is tomorrow.
I know what that's like, where you the day before you present and write the docs, you go up on center stage usually, right? And so you probably are, yeah. But you don't get nervous. You don't.
Well, I don't know. It's it's the first in-person event after a while in Europe, so yeah, it's gonna be quite emotional.
Oh, nice. Okay. All right, Anandi, you're our special guest today. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself, and kind of where you're from, what your background is?
Yeah, all over the
Sorry.
place on both of
Sorry,
those.
I meant to say where you're currently based. We just had a long discussion about how she's from all over the place.
I had a map and I was pointing. So I'm in New York right now, and I'm at Amazon, and I am doing the programmer writer is the title for doing the things with the words here at Amazon. So that's where I'm at. And I've been a writer off and on, purely doing technical writing since like 2007. I stopped to go get a PhD in something totally different. But I was always kind of doing digital research stuff and in that space.
I saw that your PhD was it like visual anthropology and religious studies or something? Something. It was very interesting.
Yeah, it was fun. It was like a little side quest. But yeah, I kept up doing kind of like digital scholarship, which is like humanities research stuff, doing digital things. So I was still still writing. I couldn't escape it if I wanted to, writing documentation, and doing coding and stuff while I was there.
Well, that's great. That's great. Well, the topic that we're going to focus on today is one that people mentioned being of interest from the last episode, and it's MCP. And Andy, you actually reached out and you said that you've been doing a lot of MCP type stuff, optimizing documentation inside of MCP server tools, and kind of seeing how the next evolution of tech writing might involve a lot more emphasis on this. Can you tell us just like a little bit about what you've been doing with MCP and what your I don't know, challenges are there, or what your interests are?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I worked in different domains. Like there's like hardware and software back when, just doing like SaaS stuff recently, and most recently doing API work. And the next, and then like evolution is weird because it's like people are still doing writing for all of these different types of tools. So it's a new domain though. So moving and shifting, and like what does it mean to be a writer here? I'm of the school that like wherever there are words with regards to a technical product, that's the technical writer's domain. So whatever's
I love that.
So what's selling the product, what's teaching people about the product, how they're learning about the product, and how they're using like the things that they're doing to use the product, like all of those domains are like where a technical writer could and should be involved, in my view. Not every place allows for that kind of moving across orgs, but I do try. Reaching out to marketing and support and education and all this stuff. And so on the engineering side, like working more in APIs, working more closely with developers, it's like, what does it mean? Those are all these discussions, right? Like, what does it mean to be an API writer? Like, how do you affect the final product? And it's like in the design, you're working your way back, like in the design of the API, like what are we naming things? How are we thinking about the information architecture, like of an API, and of like data models and stuff like that. So you're abstracting away from like the final thing that maybe the user is actually getting to. And of course, then there's the documentation that's like on that people can access in public or internal documentation. But then for MCP, engineers are dialing up tools and creating their tools and creating the infrastructure, creating MCP servers, and then just people are throwing out tools. They're deriving from APIs, either one-to-one, one-to-N. And so there's this onslaught of tools. Lo and behold, I'm lucky that I'm in an org that like recognizes there are words in the MCP tool. And guess who's really, really good about obsessing over words and how to efficiently use them strategically, surgically? Oh, we have a writing team. So great.
Yeah.
Let's like see, how does this work? And we don't know. Like it's fun. It's a fun minute of we're figuring out like paths forward with the MCP servers and tooling. What does it mean to write here? And then there's a host of problems. It's a fun minute to go read up on all of the problems of like, if you have a simple API getting turned into a simple tool, simple enough, it does one thing. You have these huge complex APIs, and then you're running up against all of the limits, the context window limits. You're running up against performance limits. Like just because it can take 1 million tokens doesn't mean it should. So, and then what does it mean where does the documentation live? Are you actually getting your public documentation into your server as a resource or whatever it is, whatever you're using? There's like prompts as well. I've been focusing really specifically in the tooling. Like, it can, if a tool is pulling from an API, it's pulling in all this information and all this input schema. And then your API then has to be really well documented. Are they always? No, they're not. No, they're not.
So it feels like there's well, you mentioned API design, and I agree that API design is a domain where writers can bring lots of expertise and lots of direct support. And then MCP servers appeared, and they're kind of like an additional layer, sometime very often between an existing API, say with an open API spec, then you have the LLM, and in between you have this MCP server. And so you mentioned prompts, like how important do you think it is for a writer to be there and say, let's create that additional interface between an almost human user and the API? So what's like, do you have like any recollection of like, well, this made an impact, or this was something that really made a difference there?
So it's interesting, like other places in the MCP server tool domain where writers can make a big impact. And one is just we're aware of the words going into it and the formatting of them. And so if, let's say, a tool is being derived from an API, like a direct one-to-one, it's like we have this API that's going to give you the weather, and we're going to have this tool that's going to answer the question, what's the weather, right? So that the one-to-one seems pretty straightforward and fine. But like if you're ingesting like these huge complex APIs, the writer is going to know what that knowledge base is. And if you're going to end up with these context window problems of like, it's just filling context window clogging, and we need to optimize the documentation that's going in there. And that's one place where it's less about the finesse. Well, it is about finessing content. There is a sense of like understanding what is critical information that has to get into a tool for the LLM to choose the tool. And then there's also finessing that to make sure it's explicit, it's clear, there's no ambiguity. This tool does this one thing. And the writers are going to obsess over these details. And so there's that part of the tool description itself and like what's happening, what's in the tool schema. That's a great place for writers to make the huge gains in performance of the LLM and accuracy. And how the tool is actually going to run. If it doesn't have the right input schema and that's not written well, the LLM's not going to know what to do with it. It's going to spit out, what the day's date is, not the weather or something. So, but the other thing is that in the prompting, so right, there's tools, prompts, and resources. And the prompting itself as well. You can have writers who are creating prompts, and they're, again, obsessing over the writing to make sure it's really clear that the tool knows what to do and how to spit that out, those results out or response out for the LLM for whatever that purpose is. And then in the resources as well, your public documentation. can be one of the resources. And then you're going to think about, how are we going to do that? Are we using LLMs.txt? Are we flattening other ways? Or are we only using a subset of our documentation in here? In all of the domains for MCP server work, MCP tooling, or a writer can be heavily involved in actually really making performance like improvements in any of those.
So maybe, Anandi, Tom, what do you think? Because some of the listeners might not know what MCP is. Like they might have heard about it.
Yeah.
So let's see if we can like describe it in a way that is very simple. To me, MCP is essentially providing an LLM, which is kind of powerless. It just answers based on its training. It's providing with the ability of doing things in the world, like running a command or calling an API endpoint, etc. So, what's the basic structure of like an MCP server?
Yeah. Do you all want to do that? I can chime in.
Like
or...
there's this file where you list the tools, right? But what you call tools really is like like an entry point, like almost like an endpoint. If we're talking about APIs, right? And you have a set of keywords that kind of trigger the command for an LLM, right? And then you have the prompts, right? Is that the basic structure?
Yeah. So it's kind of this abstraction level. And so, like I said, if you have your API that's going to get you the weather or something like that, and then you're going to make a tool so that the agent can, you're typing to a chatbot, it's like, give me the weather. And the agent is going to go and say, okay, well, this tool is called Get Weather, and it's got a description. I'm going to give you the local weather. Oh, great, we'll choose this one. And so that's where the tool description comes in. So then the resource is going to go look up, what it needs to know, what relevant documentation is available, or whatever else. The resources could be any number of things. And then using the prompts, going to give you perhaps insights on how to send the response, the API language, but like send the answer back through the agent to the end user. So it's this like level of abstraction. So in the one-to-one, that's like, okay, that's pretty simple. But even me, I'm like, well, why do we really need that tool? Or why aren't we just connecting straight to the endpoint, right? We're just getting the weather. What's fascinating for the engineers, and where it's like, wow, it's a Wild West, and we don't really know what's coming and how things are going to look, because you can take that, if it's a more complex request, we're like, oh, I want a series of flights for something, and flight examples, which I would never do that. But anyway, is that you can have the one to end. And so then you're having one tool. It's like, recommend me some flights for these dates, this area. And it's going to go it's going to go look around, the agent's going to go look around, the LM is going to look around for like any number of tools. They're going to help it do the thing based off of the descriptions and the names of the tools. And then you can have, those might not be an API. It could be a subset of an API and just only the parameters it needs to find flights like coming out of New York or something like that, like budget flights out of New York. Not all the flights out of New York for the whole year, but just the budget flights for today or something like that. And it's only going to have like 3 input parameters as opposed to 100 or something like that. So you get this increase in efficiency and kind of exactness with that. And so then you're going to have all these niche tools being created as these levels of abstractions built on top of APIs.
I find this, it's fascinating, this whole step that the industry has taken with giving agents capabilities to actually perform actions. I remember the previous year, it was just chat interfaces with a response and you could copy and paste it and so on. And now routinely when I'm writing docs, I see that it's executing a lot of commands, not just to read files and write files, but sometimes to do other things, create files and so on. I like the flight example you gave, Anandi. My question is, so most of these APIs that we're documenting require authorization. So how do you handle API keys for these different endpoints that the agent is going to run?
So this is like adjacent to my domain, but I will say that the auth question is a big one, and getting it right it takes time. Like it takes a lot of research and time for the engineers who are working on like the auth question. And I don't know, I'm watching it unfold, and it takes a while to get it right and to make sure that it's secure against like prompt injection and things like that. And
Because for sure, like if you're working in a version controlled system and you're just like making updates to docs, it could go wild and you could just revert it and say, yeah, don't commit this. But if you're making an API call and let's say there's cost associated with it or it's doing something external outside of VCS, yeah, it does seem a little more scary, right? Like I hope it interprets things right.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And the part where I don't think anybody has an answer to this and we can protect against it somewhat is like the non-deterministic part of like doing these tasks and asking the agent for these tasks. And so you ask it twice and it's going to do something different each time, right? So how can you build an MCP server and the tools to ensure like repeatable accuracy from the LLM?
I mean,
And
that's
like
that's very interesting because it brings up the question of, let's say that something goes wrong in the MCP server. Maybe you tested it, etc. Like, who is liable? Like, is the LLM that isn't capable of understanding, or is the writer that hasn't explained well enough, like in the prompt, how to do things? So, and it brings like a whole new dimension for us writers because, I mean, yes, we are responsible, of course, of documentation when it goes to the user, but usually we don't get like direct feedback. And with an MCP server, you do get a direct feedback of what went wrong.
Mm-hmm. The evals question, the evaluations question is a really fun one. And I'm starting to get into it for like the work that I'm doing and trying to figure out like how as a writer can I leverage eval frameworks to test a prompt. Well, primarily tool descriptions is what I'm most interested in. Tool descriptions and input schema. So the bread and butter of getting the tools selected and working, and seeing. And then working from there, is it 500 characters? Is it 300? What's the sweet spot for character count? It's around there. What does it look like for my use case? Or is it more or less description? How is it going to handle if markdown is still floating around, from the front end, like open API spec this is pulling from or something like that. So leveraging the evals and getting writers involved in the fact that there are evaluations here, I think is really critical to getting a handle on the impact of the words in the MCP server.
Are you like Anandi, are you actively kind of executing on eval iterations? Like, are you doing some kind of evaluation test to measure your doc quality or task quality, and then like iterating on that to improve it? Is it something?
That's the end goal. That's the end goal. So we're just at I'm at the really early stages of trying to figure out where evals fit in my work and what type of eval framework is going to work best for the system. So right now I'm in like the research stages of just like taking all of it in and then figuring out with the dev team like what we should implement to do this particular type of work. And it's cool because like I'm like really lucky to be involved with the dev teams where like I'm able to talk to them about this stuff and like what do the writers need, because this is the joint effort of them like getting the tools ready and writing tools, but then also the prompts and the descriptions and everything is the thing that we're testing with the evals, right? Like they have the structure in there, and then I'm coming in with the words, and it's a thing together. So it's a joint effort to figure out how evals are going to work for our particular use case. I'm really interested in trying to do, I guess, like some A/B testing around it. The LLM as a judge type of eval where you're having another LLM go in and grade your interaction there with the tools and the prompts and everything. Seems, and it's an endless like recursive cycles. You get your LLM as a judge to judge your to evaluate your prompt and response, but then you have to then train that LLM to do that work, and then it's just like, and you could, I think, keep moving back in the training, and at some point so it's the evals framework I'm still trying to wrap my head around, but I know it's going to be necessary, and it's going to be a huge part in how we get like better accurate tool.
I'm really curious to know if there are any early conclusions or early realizations about how writing needs to change to optimize for the evals. For example, do I not need to worry about my sidebar structure and how I'm organizing files? Is it all just one big soup? And do I need to just load in a bunch of detail that normally I might say, that's a little too much? Like how's it changing how we write?
Yeah. So I'm an information architecture person, like to my dying days. So I think so if you're looking at, the structure of a doc site, and you said sidebar, and I'm thinking of like the nav, right? Like where is stuff, and like how are we categorizing stuff in them, and the taxonomies, and pretty abstracted things, and getting down into the details. I was like, okay, how are we like listing our overviews and our responses and the specs and like all the user guides and things. So the whole pipeline of information architecture, I think, is still really important. Even if you're going to take your doc site and flatten it out and feed it into an LLM, there's a hierarchy there that can be understood, and a prioritization of like, this is how we organize information. This is where it is. If you're looking for overviews, like they're all going to be in this one spot. If you're looking for errors, they're all going to be in this one spot, and user guides, etc. So I think like thinking about the organization of the which is the knowledge base, right? It's going to go into the resources, is going to become the knowledge base. Is still like critically important. I think if you throw in this like into the soup, it goes. Like I have thought about this. I'm like, well, do we need like this dev portal to still function in this way, or can we just like throw everything in there and I mean they'll all figure it out. And I think that probably the listeners here have tried something like that and realized, wow, the agent they're not good at this. So the clearer we can be and precise we can be as far as like how information is organized and feeding that as a resource, like in this case, the MCP server, the better we can do that, I think the better that we equip the server and the tools to do what they need to do. It's still important.
That's reassuring.
I'd like to think so.
Right?
No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think anytime you're feeding tons and tons of information to an LLM and expecting any good writing to come out of it, it can't handle, right, huge chunks of information like that. It's going to do well with the beginning and the end, and the stuff in the middle is just going to be effectively like soup. So the best way you can modularize your documentation, like modular documentation, is still really important. Organizing it, still really important. Thinking semantically about how that stuff is organized, still really important. And that feeds directly into the tooling.
Yeah. I mean, it feels to me, I've been playing a bit with MCP servers lately. I built one, very simple one, to call a tool to check the style of the docs. And my impression, Anandi, I don't know if it's also your sensation, but I think this is one very promising direction of documentation tooling, in the sense that it's mixing the best of both worlds. Like on one hand, you have the deterministic aspect of, say, like defining a tool call, defining an API endpoint, or maybe you have a tool just to feed that information architecture or that taxonomy to the LLM in a more structured way. And then on the other hand, you have the enormous but also non-deterministic capabilities of the LLM. But it's a way for me of taming a bit the LLM to have something more structured, that layer of the MCP server, right?
Right. Yeah. So I think, and just to note that the MCP server that you kind of wrote about recently, I've already saved it. Like we're going to talk about it as a team. Like, can we do this? So we wanted to have some additional checks on our work, and like this is fantastic. And so what I've mostly been going on about here is how, as a writer, you're working on MCP servers and tools as a product. But then there's the flip side, what you've written about, which is cool. And I'm like, I'm literally looking at this every day and wasn't thinking about how can I create an MCP server to better the docs themselves. Which I was like, that's really fun. So yeah, I think that you have this great opportunity with good writing and good planning and good organization to reduce that non-deterministic part of the LLM agent experience when you're trying to do that. And for docs, it is critical. Right. So if you're using any agent in part of that process, you cannot have it. You you cannot veer from like the expected outcome like every time you're calling it. So anything that you can do there, and that's why following best practices for the tool descriptions and schemas and outputs and things like that is really critical.
I would love to see, well, so many people would love to see the style problem solved. And so Fabrizio, your like experiment with the Veil server and trying to, address style concerns in that way seems like it's very, very much a sought after goal. The style thing seems like it would be a simple problem to solve, and it's not. I spent probably an hour just editing somebody's doc that they sent me, and it was clearly generated by AI, and we're like, oh my gosh, we got to fix so many issues. Like just sentence style capitalization was the first one, right? And then we had other just conventions that we had to fix. And I'm like, why is this still a problem? Can't we implement something that would just like address all these issues? But it's difficult. So
yeah. Do we want to have a formal plug for this? I was really interested in it. I know, Fabrizio, if you want to say like some words about the Veil MCP server.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, to me, the solution, like in the long run, would have to either train a small model or fine tune a model on the company writing, for example. So that, because using a model that has been trained on README files is always going to be problematic. Like if you ask documentation by default to that model, it will have like, emojis, title casing, bullet points without a period in the end, always. So with that in mind, if we have to use a generic model, like I'm testing, the advantage I see in using MCP is that it brings some predictability and some structure and some repeatability, especially, to those interactions. And the LLM is gonna get like a structure output with a prompt that is always gonna be the same. So of course you could do it without it, but it would never be as predictable and as stable as if you were using an MCP server, because every time you use it for style checking, your prompt will be slightly different, unless you copy and paste. So that's what I was calling it. Like, is it glorified copy pasting? Well, in a way, but it's also like chaining instructions together so that you really try to reduce the noise and the randomness. And the LLM, I think, I asked the LLM yesterday, because the Veil linter is able to output JSON. And I asked the LLM, what sort of output do you prefer? Like, do you prefer JSON or do you prefer just plain Markdown or plain text? Because maybe it's less tokens for you. And the LLM surprised me telling that they prefer JSON for some reason, because, it's clear to me where these ends or whatever. I don't know if it was being maybe overly polite. Perhaps that's the case. But it's interesting that while I was building the tool, I was also asking the LLM. It's like repairing a robot, and you ask questions to a robot, like, where do you want your arm? No, I want it that way. Okay. So with, so there's also that interactive aspect to building the MCP server. But yeah, I think, for me, the next step will, I bought this book about building an LLM from scratch. It's fascinating. I don't know where I get with that, but the budget also perhaps is a problem. But I really think that the next goal is to, especially for style, is to really fine tune or train a model from scratch on those tasks, like a very small model.
Sure. Yeah. It's interesting that I would be so happy if I never saw another like bulleted list replaced with like emojis in any output. I would be so happy. But yeah, I think you're saying like chaining the instructions to each request and response, like interaction, I think is really key there. And then going in and saying like, where are all the places where you can make improvements, and like the name, like in the MCP, like in the actual protocol, the name and the description, the input schema, the output schema, the errors, the whole bit, and making sure that's really clear so that you're reducing that like non-deterministic aspect of it. You can rely on it actually producing the type of writing or changes or whatever it is that you're looking for. I was looking at this every day, and I never thought, oh wait, we can apply this to actually writing as well, and it's brilliant. It's great. And so I was really excited to see that.
Well, Anandi, it's great to have you on this show. It's great to just get different voices. You've got a lot of like enthusiasm. You're doing some innovative stuff. Do you like working
Thanks.
in this new kind of realm, this new like all this new work that is probably
Yeah.
different from the old style?
Yeah, it's pretty different. I like it. I like thinking the thoughts. I like the challenge of trying to figure out like what this new space looks like and how again there are like going back to like what I opened with, I was like, there are words and that's like a place for the technical writer. One thing, I guess, like, maybe I can like leave you all with this thought experiment. Like, I'm really curious if we're doing, like, Fabrizio, you were saying, like, I want to really train an LM from scratch, like on the
Yeah.
style stuff. And so really has a really strong guidance on how to write the way we want it to use. So, but this is all relying on models, like in that, or, for our MCP servers, we're relying on models. We're building to a certain model and we're evaluating like on a certain model, and like 6 months from now, like what are we going to have to do to keep up to date and like with the latest, and that's concerning because we're building around certain expected responses. Like we're pretty deterministic beings, so like we're writing around expectations of what we're supposed to get back. And as the models are changing, we're updating models. Like what does that mean for all of this work around this space? And
Yeah. Yeah, like imagine in the changelog you could get something like, well, model version 3 has a different personality. It's quirky. And it's
yeah.
like, oh my, like how do I adapt to that?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's like verbosity or like how it is going to change, and just, I mean, all of the questions that come along with using different models. And then do we allow people to select their models? What happens when those models are changing? And that, I think, I haven't seen anybody writing on that about like how that's going to affect these things. We're barely like, I don't know, keeping up to speed with the changes in the MCP space, and like, okay, then what's next? The new like agentic reality. So I'm kind of curious, like, yeah, okay, so 6 months, a year from now, when all of this stuff is changing, then what? And what does sustainability look like there? And I have all the questions. I have like maybe one answer, but all the questions.
Well, thanks so much for coming on to our show today. And I know
Yeah, thank you.
a hard stop coming and other sort of obligations. But if people want to reach out to you, can they just reach out to you on LinkedIn, or where do they?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. So LinkedIn, I am Anandi Knuppel, and you find me, send me messages, and I love chatting with people. And yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on here, and I look forward to like listening to the rest of the conversation.
All right. Thanks, Anandi.
Well, thanks.
Thank you.
All right. So, yeah, the format that I was mentioning earlier, I really like this idea of having a guest on for the first half of the show, and then we continue the conversation afterwards. We'll see how this works. It's still an experiment, but all right. And the other thing is, I don't think that any specific show should be dominated by just one single topic, because people have broader interests. They want to keep up with the news. Somebody might say, you know what, MCP not doing anything with that, but I still want to like keep up with what's going on. So Fabrizio, just to kind of shift directions a little bit, tell us. I looked up your Berlin talk, your Write the Docs talk, and I thought
Yeah.
I would see something related to the Veil server, the AI, anything. Instead, it's Failing Well, a practical guide to growth for technical writers.
Yeah.
Nothing on the surface to do with AI. So why are you focusing on this?
Well, it's that's a good question actually. I mean, there's always a dimension of tinkering, a dimension of tooling, and I love that. But I felt like that, we are going through a time, tech writers everywhere, that it feels like full of uncertainty. And like the other day, I mentioned like getting into the Reddit, the technical writing subreddit, and reading all those questions. Remember, like people feeling like lost, not knowing what direction to take. And I've been writing a bit like is one of the recurring themes of my blog is like how to find like answers, how to find motivation, how to get out of the, pit of despair, whatever you want to call it. Because I'm seeing this. I'm seeing these pretty much everywhere in the channels, in the community. And, I think we need to take the reins a bit. And that's what the talk is about, is failure is a way of life, and failing is sort of ingrained into technical writing. Like, we fail often because that's what we do. We try to change the way organization communicates or document things, and more often than not, we are doomed to fail because those are hard changes. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't keep trying, because that's also how we advance. And so what I advocate for in the talk tomorrow, what I'll be presenting, is like some strategies. And actually, I quote you in one of those. Remember, you wrote about the value of speaking up. Remember that post you wrote?
Probably. Yeah, one comes to mind, but I'm not sure if it's the same one. But yeah.
Yeah, it was the one about telling if you were if you are in front of bullshit, just saying it. And you wrote that pretty clearly. And that's one of those things of, don't stay silent. If there's something that you think is wrong, speak up. And in general, I think technical writers should be doing that. And they brought up a very interesting situation where, actually a very interesting concept that I agree with wholly, which is wherever there are words, tech writers can help, can be there owning those words. But you do that only if you have a certain attitude, a certain take on things, and you don't feel like, well, this is not for me, I shouldn't be doing this. Well, I mean, right now is the moment where tech writers should be more vocal, more present, and take a step forward and say, we can own these words.
Sorry, now I'm remembering. Okay, it was the post that I was thinking of, and
what was the title again?
Okay, so it's Speaking Up and Calling Out BS When You See It. Some reflections on Jonathan Rauch's book, The Constitution of Knowledge. And I was going to this book club called the Seattle Intellectual Book Club, and this was a book that we read for it, and it was it was all about just like not being silent and speaking up. About so many different aspects. It wasn't focused on tech writing in general. It was more about how like our whole knowledge system is constructed on this idea that you have various bodies that kind of negotiate and find balance and criticize each other and so on in order to come to some sort of truth, using the idea of like the Constitution having separate bodies in place to try to provide that balance. But yeah, coming back to the other part, you mentioned just a lot of uncertainty that people have, and and maybe people should speak up and be more open about that. But really interesting focus. I like that. I get the sense that AI has saturated so many conversations that people are fatigued by it, and there's no like clear thing that people need to always do. So that's part of the fatigue. I see this at my work, I'm constantly declining like meeting after meeting where it's like AI demo, hour of AI this, hour, some kind of just constant AI training, tooling. It's like, and I'm giving these as well. So I know that people are like probably doing the same thing. Anyway, it's an interesting time, and it's full of uncertainty. You never quite know. I do think there was something very, very encouraging that happened just a couple weeks ago, and you posted about this on your LinkedIn profile. This is this discussion about Claude skills. You were responding to a hacker news thread, and let's see. Okay, the hacker news thread was regarding an article called "Claude Skills Are Awesome, Maybe a Bigger Deal Than MCP."
Yeah.
And you had like posted an excerpt from it about how essentially Claude skills are documentation. Like there's just. Do you want to talk about like do you know much about Claude Skills that you could relay the gist of it here?
So I'm still trying them out, but essentially you could picture them as a small package of documentation that tells Claude how to do things in a more systematic way. That's the way you could describe it, and I think it's a way of making things like MCP servers more intuitive. And like, for example, I don't think my parents will never use MCP servers. I mean, just the name is like MCP, like what's that? It's too technical, and they probably don't need something like that. But Cloud Skills, I think, is trying to breach the gap, and I'm sure we'll see other players doing something similar in the sense that, well, I'm giving it a recipe. They're recipes. I'm giving it a recipe, and they're gonna follow it, and it's gonna be like kind of systematic. Now, how effective those are, I'm not sure. Like, I think it's probably gonna be less structured and less predictable than an MCP server. Then again, I don't expect anybody using something like Cloud Skills for anything critical. So, all the talk we had about security and prompt injection, I mean, Cloud Skills is more like for daily usage. But it really speaks to me about something I've been discussing recently with more people. That is, these technologies are, they need to be more accessible, and the access to it need to be more, like democratized in a way. And one of the things I was wondering, like yesterday, was having this dinner with more writers that are going to attend Writer Docs, and we were talking about we should really get like maybe in a year, 2 years time, 3 years time, like train your own model, something like that. Like I expect that all the steps that are involved in making these tools available right now, they're kind of firewall. Like, the companies behind LLMs like Claude or Gemini, etc., they're providing this service, but like it happened in the past with other technologies, I think people will be eventually empowered to create that technology themselves at home in a way or another. Of course, right now, like training a model costs millions of dollars, so I don't expect that to happen overnight. But things like skills is a little step in that direction of do it yourself. Like it is, let's make it very easy. Maybe in 2 years' time, they will launch something like train your own model, or something that makes fine tuning very easy.
Train your lawnmower. That's an interesting example. But yeah, I agree. Like the accessibility of these tools to be trained is something that we're seeing more and more for all these special skills that a generalist model won't really know how to do. And it is encouraging to see documentation be a primary player in how this all sort of evolves. I do think that's good. Yeah, there's so much in this space that is full of uncertainty, even from a product perspective. Coming back to this earlier example of the flights, like you want to use LLMs to figure out flights. Well, a company's primary concern is if somebody goes into Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT and they're like, hey, build me a little app that will get the cheapest flights to Albuquerque or something. You want it, if you're Kayak, you want it to use your APIs. If you're Orbitz, you want it to use your APIs. If you're something else, you want it to use your APIs and so on, right? And the model, how do you influence which APIs it chooses? Good luck. Like you hope that the user has an MCP that kind of leans toward a certain API. But anyway, there's a lot of just like black box type stuff where who knows how it actually works.
Yeah, and even opening up the black box doesn't help sometimes. Like really depends on the kind of audience that these players are targeting. There's another thing. So again, the importance of documentation, and somehow connected again to the theme of like taking the reins, like taking a bit more control of things. Like last week, we launched at work I wrote these AI and docs guidelines. Essentially, what they are is, I guess you have similar guidelines also at your job for general usage of AI. Like what kind of things you can do with AI. I'm seeing these guidelines sprouting more and more at companies in the technology sector. Usually they're just focused on coding or things, information processing, or what kind of docs you can feed to them, etc. In this particular case, what we're trying to create is guidelines on how you create documentation through generative AI. And why we created those, it's quite common sense, but my thinking is that this wave is coming, this tsunami wave of AI and documentation and folks creating documentation through AI is coming. We are not able to stop it. We cannot stop it. What we can do is surf the wave. And the way you surf the wave is by channeling all that energy that is going to come of people wanting to create docs in a way that is better for us, in the sense of, it's okay. Let's send the message that it's okay to create documentation using Gen AI, but do it in this way so that everybody wins, and do it also in these other ways so that we don't have, discussions around style, for example, or for example, one of the things we say is use our agent instructions file that we prepared so that the Gen AI, the agent you're going to use, is going to write documentation that requires less edits. So that it's kind of providing tools in a sneaky way and instructions so that the output is better. And also I see more companies like creating their own libraries of agent instructions. And I think that's a way also of keeping the output a little more compliant and predictable and having the quality we expect.
I'm glad you brought up this topic, because just last week I had a glimpse of what I think could be a nightmare for technical writers in terms of this AI generated content coming in. Let's say you have some member of your team who's not a writer, who needs a documentation topic on something. So they use AI and they generate it. And to them, it looks decent. Maybe, English isn't even their first language. So anyway, they send it to you, and now you've got this, I don't want to say AI slop to edit, but basically you do have AI slop to edit, right? Because it just has so many things that have to be fixed, from your company's own style guide and conventions to just like your general writer intuition about how this should be changed and so on. Most of us, like when we use AI to write something, we make a ton of edits to that content before we finalize it and publish it. But other people aren't doing that. They're expecting us to do that. And I just got my first one last week. I was actually pretty excited to receive it because engineers so far hadn't really started to use AI much. And I was like, why aren't you using it? It's so much easier. So somebody finally did, and they wrote about a topic that we definitely needed. And it was like about 65-70% there, right? So it was great. But I was like, I don't want to sit here and have this AI slop editing task times 10 every week for all these incoming docs. You mentioned the agent markdown file. I think that's a key strategy I need to implement so that whatever directory they're working in, an agent markdown file is going to get rid of some of these easy.
But did they disclose AI usage, or you just like kind of discovered it? Like, how did you know?
Gosh, it just like screams AI. Like so many different conventions that I'm used to seeing. All the things like the way lists are introduced, certain bold formatting, just the generalized soulless language, and so on.
So that's important. I think docs contribution through AI in a company setting, I think the contributors should disclose that they use AI and how they use the AI. Why? Because it's more honest. It's sort of educational. It's also an incentive not to overdo it, in the sense of, oh, this guy created like 30 AI PRs. And we also have this rule that is applicable not just to LLM contributions, but also human contributions, but is a rule of, keep the PR small, like you were, as if you were creating it without LLMs, because using AI for producing documentation is not an excuse to flood the team with pull request reviews. You don't have to produce 10x. do it as you would do it. The idea is that AI is augmenting your capabilities, is acting as a co-writer, but you shouldn't use it to dump lots of stuff and slop, as you call it, on the tech writing team. So we'll see if people will follow it. So far, so good. But I think this kind of helping people through guidelines and policies and tooling is a way of channeling a bit that trend. And
I personally am mixed about always flagging that I've used AI when I'm writing docs and requesting people to review them. I feel like here's why I'm mixed.
yeah,
I would pretty much be adding this little statement to almost every PR, we call them CLs for change lists, that I send out. And a lot of times I am using AI, but it's not like I'm just pressing a button and copying and pasting. I'm like steering it through specific tasks and changing and tweaking and editing. And so by the time I'm like have something done, it's been vetted and reviewed by me. But yeah, some people have called out like in the past, like, hey, was this AI written? And they like, you should have flagged it. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, sorry about that. But it's very, very
well,
uncommon.
I know I feel that in the sense that, for example, if I use I don't know how to complete, does that qualify as something I should disclose? Probably not. Or I do like a content conversion, like I convert a Markdown table to another format or whatever. Is that sufficient changes? That do they warrant a disclosure? Probably not. But I would say the golden rule is if you feel unsure about what the LLM has done, then flag it, because then you will have couple set of eyes, extra eyes checking that together with your own criteria.
Yeah. It probably gets people to review things more carefully, and for sure, like AI is great at bluffing and just coming across as super confident about something, and if you're a reviewer, it's easy to rubber stamp something because it just looks right and so on. So I was curious. There was another post you wrote that we've been talking about, but we haven't actually called out explicitly. You said why I built an MCP server to check my docs and what it taught me. And in this, you mentioned a few things. Now we're talking about authoring and so on. You mentioned a few things that you are hoping to do, like self-healing documentation. We already talked about checking docs for style. Now we're talking about just authoring. I'm curious to know, because it's always great to hear perspectives from people outside of my company. How's the rest of the world using AI?
Right.
What is your typical like AI workflow? Are you using like Claude Code? Are you using other tools? Are you using the CLI type stuff?
I'm using Cloud Code for coding. I'm one of the contributors of our documentation tooling at work. So I use Cloud Code. It's the best model for coding, really. But I just use it for coding. For documentation, I'm using Cursor usually, or Copilot. Like maybe 60% of what I do is just autocomplete. I mean, it's that good in the sense of, for quick formatting is fantastic. Like, I don't know, like for example, you are editing headings in a long document. With a couple examples, the autocomplete will be able to get what you're trying to do. And then it's just hitting the tab key, and going through the doc to apply all those changes. Other times I use it, for example, to, one of the things I do, like I point it to some changes in the code. It's all open source projects. And I tell it, look, these changed, and we have this README file, and we have this other doc that mentioned these things. So I provide all these sources. And I did this the other day. And I told it, create a document similar to these other document that we have. So I was already pointing at an existing structure, but with these caveats. So I was essentially just instructing it as if I was telling an intern what to do. And it created a very decent draft, based, of course, they also had like the agent instructions. So it wasn't starting from scratch. But when it comes to like following like a very structured pattern, and you provide it with good source information, context, it does a decent job like 70% of the times. And then you jump in, you edit. I mean, that's the most generative thing I've done. And then, well, I'm experimenting with adding Copilot, again, with agent instructions as a reviewer. But my hope is to leverage MCP server and Veil to do that in a way that is a bit more deterministic.
There was a lot of there's a lot of interest in Gemini CLI because of its ability to plug in more MCP servers.
I guess you cannot tell us when 3.0 is gonna go live, right?
I have no idea. But
I can't wait. I can't wait.
I was really comparing Gemini CLI against like Gemini Code Assist, which is like the side pane. I'm guessing internally it's not called that, so it's like I don't know what the exact differences are externally, but basically the form factor of using a CLI versus using a side pane was interesting to compare. And a lot of people are really on fire with the CLI because they're like, man, I can give it this MCP and it can build my code and I can do this and that. Whereas the side pane seems a little more fixed. But at the same time, the CLI seemed so challenged in terms of presenting a file diff about what it had changed, because you're kind of trapped in the command line area and it's hard to show visually what's changed and give you little buttons to accept or reject. So I actually prefer the side pane because I want to go through and see the changes. Yeah. I want to highlight the changes and be like, well, why did you change that? You know, persuade me on this, or tell me, why did you delete this block? And have a conversation.
Yeah, for docs for sure. I mean, it's the same for me. Like the CLI is great for code because it's better at calling tools, for example. Like if you're developing a Node application, you know, it's just way more efficient. For some reason, it's more efficient at calling npm or whatever. But for docs, I really want to see the docs changing in real time while it does the thing, you know?
Yeah. It's nice to have multiple tools at your disposal. It sounds like you do quite a bit of coding. I don't really do much coding. I'm mostly just like working in the documentation space. I should do more coding, perhaps, just to, I don't know, test out everything. But I mean, we've got QA people doing that too, so it often feels redundant. At any rate, I like exploring different tools, and I realized something else in comparing these tools. I was trying to provide a list of what tasks and capabilities you had and how those compared between the CLI tool versus the Code Assist tool. Right. And I realized that this is something we touched on earlier. Like what a tool can do highly depends on like how it's been customized, what extensions or MCP servers it has available to it, what prompts you give it, what other context you give it. Just like so many customizations like alone make it difficult. Can it read a certain file? Can it read bugs? Can it read the comments on the bugs? It's like, well, depends if you have this extension. And if you do, did you start it? Did you start the tool with that extension enabled? And what were the settings in that extension? It's like impossible.
Yeah. And that, I think, makes it a little difficult to also even just teach or explain these technologies, because it's, again, you are, you know, similar to what happens with front-end development, with all the frameworks and all the tools and all the, you know, are you using Node 24, 22, whatever? Now with LLMs and agents, it's like the first question is like, oh, so what CLI are you using? What IDE are you using? And have you enabled this? Or are you using this other server? What model are you using? And it's like, is a pure combinatorial nightmare where you have to figure out what the best combo is. And again, I think it's a sign of how young this technology is. But eventually, this also shall stabilize a bit, hopefully.
Yeah. One other variable is the agent markdown file, right? It's like, well, your output might be totally different depending upon what agent markdown file is instructing it to do. So this idea that you have, or that you brought up, of how do we teach others to use AI tools effectively and empower them, you know, it's like, it's a formidable challenge because you have to communicate all this info in the setup and then sample prompts and what you can hope to get back and so on.
And then the model changes, as Anandi said, and you're back to square one.
Yeah, somebody compared the models like a family of friends, and you never quite know who you're getting. Maybe you get the really smart like aunt one day, and the next day you get like a dumb uncle, and so on. It's like it's just like they're all kind of highly related, but sometimes you get a much more capable session. I'm always like toggling the model when sometimes it's like giving me bogus info sometimes, and I'm like, oh, I had the wrong model selected. Like change it back.
Or it's
back
like
to Pro.
you literally read comments like in the Slack or at work or in Hacker News, like, oh, Claude is having a bad day. It's as if he, maybe they were partying last night. I don't know, but it's just the reality we're living in.
Yeah. Well, Fabrizio, I know you're gearing up for your Write the Docs talk, so I hope that goes well. I hope that I'm sure you're going to be a very popular speaker there. And how many people are at that conference? Like 100?
So Eric, the organizer, told me there were like 200.
200. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and lots of online tickets as well. Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks for carving out some time to do this podcast. Really appreciate it. And any last parting thoughts before we wind up here and close up?
Well, I would, I loved having Anandi in the show. And again, I would probably reinforce the message that if you want to join us, right, I think we are quite open to it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was fun. It was great to get like a fresh voice and see enthusiasm and real expertise. I mean, she's smart. She's got a PhD. She's definitely in this space, brings a different perspective. And that's part of the interest for me to this, just to get outside my work environment and space and people and see how others are using these tools, what they're doing. So yeah, definitely we want to have more guests. We want to bring them on the first half of the show, so that's not just about that guest and topic. It's still broader, but still integrate this multiplicity of voices and perspectives. So yeah, reach out to us. And also, if you have topics that you want us to cover, let us know. And yeah, we'll consider it. So thanks. All right. Thanks, Fabrizio, and good luck.
Thank you, Tom.